Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Joining us from Washington, D.C. tonight to talk about the future of the Turkish Lira is Merve Hande Akmehmet, who is a US-based economist and the president of the Hologram Network. Good evening, Ms. Akmehmet. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Hello.
So the Turkish Lira plunged historically today, as you know. Can you start by telling us what's happening to the Turkish Lira? What's causing this free fall?
Sure. Well, two things. First, we have to look at the bubble, and two, the dynamics under the bubble. What is causing the bubble? So if we start with the current bubble, this is the tension between the White House and Ankara about Pastor Brunson's and Hakan Atillah's swap deal, which is still a very sensitive issue that they're still negotiating on. This sharp drop in the Turkish assets came right after the delegation actually returned from Washington, D.C. with no apparent progress. In my opinion, what started at the beginning as a dangerous game of hostage diplomacy is turning out to be a much more sour subjects than what both parties have actually imagined. As far as we know so far, the deal on the table was that in return for the release of the pastor, who has been imprisoned for almost 2 years, the U.S. administration reportedly recommended a light fine, in quotations, on Halkbank, and sending the jailed Halkbank executive Hakan Atillah back to Turkey to serve out the rest of his term. The word in Washington is that even as a deal sweetener, President Trump even mediated for the release of a Turkish citizen in Israel, Ebru Özkan, who had been arrested in Israel. And Israel actually released Özkan in July, and she was sent back to Turkey in mid-July, as far as I remember. However, the word is that Ankara, after this, changed its position and requested 0 fines on the Halkbank deal, which the White House apparently did not and could not promise, as this is a matter of legal jurisdiction rather than a bargaining chip. So as these issues became more publicly discussed issues, of course, markets became fully aware and had their eyes on each and every single development from that. Now the pastor is the least of Turkey's macroeconomic concerns, if you ask me. However, the markets tied the pastor issue as a key symbol to buy and sell Turkey's currency and equity markets. During Finance Minister Berat Albayrak's presentation today, Donald Trump's tweet about doubling the metal tariffs on Turkey, of course, didn't help either. So this is the bubble part. But what is under the bubble? Of course, I mean, there's the distance between Turkey and the United States has been growing as each pursues security and economic imperatives at the expense of the other, and markets do follow. Turkey's macroeconomic standing, in terms of all the metrics that Western-oriented free market economists evaluate, are showing red flags: large current account deficit, bad debt dynamics, rising inflation, the independence of the central bank are all issues that affect market positions. On top of these, Turkey's political risk premium was also being monitored by the markets for the past 2 years or so. Therefore, when we talk about systematic risk, markets suddenly also start evaluating the overall risks in the system, Turkey's political developments pretty closely, and even Turkey's system as well. For example, in Washington, the belief is that Turkey's legal system, all of the recently expanded counterterrorism laws, and the current hyper-nationalistic political atmosphere gives Ankara the license to crack down on anything that is the security threat, in quotation mark. This creates a negative environment for investors and businesses because they are not sure if anything they do will be considered a security threat or not. Therefore, solid actions should be taken, definitely to solidify the trust in between.
Technically speaking, is there a way out of this? What should be done, in your opinion, to save the Turkish Lira?
Well, yes, of course, there is a way out of this. It definitely requires a lot of responsibility. Here is my recipe for it. So one, reach a deal for the pastor. right? As I mentioned earlier, the global markets already tied the issue as a key symbol to buy and sell Turkish assets. If a deal is reached, this would start normalizing the Turkish lira, which hit a record low of 6.5 against the US dollar today. Two, show that the central bank can act independently. So what does that mean? Even though Erdogan politically does not raise interest rates, which is his decision, his political standing, prove that the central bank is still capable of doing so. At this point, I'm not sure how many basis points the trick, but let the central bank do its job. Third, most importantly, for the first two actions to work, these have to be followed by a broad normalization process. And this includes the political and the judiciary realms as well.
And what do you think about Finance Minister Albayrak's new medium-term economic plan, the one that was revealed today in a press meeting?
Mm-hmm. Finance Minister mentioned that they will be targeting a much more diversified economy with more budgetary discipline, which is great, and that there is a team, special team, working on structural reforms. He gave very important messages, I believe, about the independence of the Turkish central bank as well. In my opinion, these are all words, but they need to be followed by solid action plans. These are tough times, and words only create more bubbles unless they are followed by realistic actions. Structural reforms are extremely important for the Turkish economy and for its macroeconomic standing. The draft action plan should be immediately announced, as soon as possible, without delaying or without waiting until September, which was the word. So, printing it out and announcing it would definitely help.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Akmehmet, earlier today in a series of tweets where he criticized Albayrak's new economic plan, renowned economist Donny Roderick said, again, I repeat, it was earlier today after the press meeting by Minister Albayrak, Roderick tweeted that this turmoil wasn't in fact a question of if, but rather one of when. Would you agree with this kind of a statement?
From a Western free market economy perspective, he's absolutely right. Let's look what's on the paper, right? On paper, there is a high and rising inflation trend with no interest rate mechanism to play its counterparting force. Therefore, inflation is rising and rising, and interest rates just cannot be as a partner to them. They cannot be rise. They cannot be increased. So. And on top of this, there is a devaluating currency situation in the country. Private sector's dollar-denominated debt is critical and needs to be managed flawlessly. But having said all of these things that raise red flags, I understand, Turkey is a country with very different economic and internal dynamics. There's a huge informal economy in the country, which is still huge part of the economy and helps a big deal. Also, in general, we should also put things into perspective. These are not normal times. These are really different times. Even in monetary policy making these days, we observe that global market forces are shifting from passive monetary rivalry to a more active, more aggressive monetary rivalry mode. Sanctions, trade wars, currency wars, you name it. All of these things are happening one after another. Who's going to win? Likely nations with larger and much more diverse economies. This shift is likely to favor them. And monetary rivalry is all about economic influence. And as every economy struggles to battle with these forces, Turkey can definitely try different models for growth. There is nothing wrong about that. But the concern is that explaining and communicating this model flawlessly to national markets. If there is a clear choice to move into a new discipline, away from a free Western free market economy discipline to a more centralized model, Sure, but just make sure that commit well. Otherwise, the currency prices rise just like today, and it's just a huge big mess. This reminds me of China. We have very different dynamics, don't get me wrong, but China also has a very distinctive political economy model, far removed from the standard Western models, actually referred by the economists as the Beijing consensus. It relies on the continuing role of an unchallenged central bureaucracy. So there is nothing wrong about centralizing things, just communicate this what direction you want to take the country to. In China models, for example, there's very firm control of financial activity. And this is one of the key elements of China's economic model. I mean, imagining Turkey moving into a non-Western model like this, I mean, can the country really afford to impose financial restrictions to back up this new centralized system of economic governance? I mean, I don't really believe so. So I think it will be a fusion of policies, and which makes it even harder for foreign investors to realize. Therefore, we need clarity and solid action plans.
Mm-hmm. And finally, to what extent do you think this crisis, this ongoing crisis of the Turkish lira, could impact different currencies and markets?
It can definitely translate into the global markets, and especially to other emerging markets. It can trigger a move towards more safer assets, like government bonds, etc., if this continues. But look at North Korea, or for example, Brexit. When those things created volatility in the markets, somehow it always bounced back. So that would be that would be my take on it. It would bounce back globally, but maybe more threatful to emerging markets.
Thank you very much, Ms. Akmehmet, for being with us tonight and for your comments.
Thank you.
Now we'll continue with our next news video on the Turkish lira and Finance Minister Berat Albayrak's medium-term economic plan.
Treasury and Finance Minister Berat Albayrak revealed Turkey's medium-term economic plan today at the Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul. He has vowed to execute Turkey's new economic model together with all national and international stakeholders, while stressing that a decisive approach and the central bank's independence would be maintained. One of the most important elements of our new economic approach is that it is a decisive approach, Albayrak told leading private sector representatives. In this process, we will finally work every single detail as a wide spectrum, including all national and international stakeholders, he said. Another of our main principles is to establish full independence of monetary policy. I refrain from talking about the central bank as much as I can, and when I have to speak, I use a sensitive language. The central bank's independence should always continue as a principle. Its independence is very important. Reinforcing financial stability will be one of our high priority targets, he added. Simultaneously with the minister's speech, US President Donald Trump said he had authorized higher tariffs on imports from Turkey, imposing a 20% duty on aluminum and 50% on steel. I have just authorized a doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum with respect to Turkey as their currency, the Turkish lira, slides rapidly downward against our very strong dollar, Trump said in a post on Twitter. Our relations with Turkey are not good at this time, he added. The Turkish lira briefly tumbled to a fresh low near 6.5 per dollar this morning as a deepening rift between the United States and intensifying worries about the state of the economy dragged on the currency again. It was 5.46 to the dollar as of 5 p.m. local time yesterday, while it has rebounded on Tuesday after it hit a record of 5.42 against the US dollar on Monday, marking the biggest daily drop of 5.5% in 10 years. The lira has fallen more than 35% this year after losing nearly a quarter of its value in 2017. Meanwhile, in a speech overnight in the northeastern Turkish town of Rize late on Thursday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan dismissed concerns over the tumbling currency, calling on Turks to have no worries, and adding, "If they have their dollars, we have our people, our God. We will not lose the economic war," Erdogan also said after Friday prayers in the northern province of Bayburt during his tour of Black Sea provinces. Those who have dollars, euros, or gold under their pillows should go and exchange them with the Turkish lira. This is a national struggle. This will be my nation's response to those who have declared an economic war, he added. One of the triggers of the fluctuations on Turkish currency is a standoff with the US over a detained American pastor that Turkey has put on trial for espionage and terror-related charges linked to a failed coup attempt 2 years ago. Washington has demanded the pastor's release and imposed financial sanctions on 2 Turkish ministers and warned of additional measures. High-level meetings in Washington between US and Turkish officials ended this week without an apparent resolution.
Turkey-US relations remain strained as Turkey continues to refuse the release of the detained US pastor Andrew Brunson.
Turkey has responded to USA's decision to add Turkey's Minister of Justice Hamid Gül and Minister of Interior Süleyman Soylu to its global Magnitsky sanctions list over the leading roles they played in the arrest and detention of US pastor Andrew Brunson. In response, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced on August 4th that he would instruct his officials to freeze any Turkish assets of US Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke. Secretary Zinke is responsible for managing the US's natural resources and cultural heritage. While tension seems to grow rapidly between the US and Turkey, there are also efforts to find a common ground between the two nations. On Wednesday, a Turkish delegation held talks with the US State Department in a bid to defuse a crisis between Washington and Ankara. US State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert has said the two sides discussed a range of bilateral matters, including Pastor Brunson, adding that the conversations continue. The Turkish side, however, remained silent about the talks, and Turkey has not yet taken any concrete steps to release Pastor Andrew Brunson. One US official spoke to Bloomberg, stating that the Turkish delegate wanted to negotiate over the jailed banker Hakan Atilla and his transfer to Turkey. However, the US delegation refused to negotiate over until they were assured that Turkey would free Pastor Brunson. According to Sputnik Turkey, the US delegate also handed a list of 15 more Americans that are jailed in Turkey and requested their immediate release from prison. This is believed to be a reason to push the negotiations into a deadlock. President Erdogan evaluated the tensions with the United States and the economic situation in Turkey as he addressed a group of businessmen from the Turkish Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchanges in his presidential palace on Thursday. "Do not worry," said Erdogan. "All this will be fixed, and the markets will relax in a reasonable period of time."
The headquarters of the main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP, announced this week that the number of the signatures demanding leadership change is insufficient.
Main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP, will not convene an extraordinary Congress as the party headquarters announced the number of the signatures demanding leadership change is insufficient. The headquarters announced on Monday that the number of signatures admissible for the convention of the Extraordinary Congress is 569, falling short from 630, which is the necessary number of bringing a party to the Congress with a leadership change. The CHP has been tackling with the intra-party debates for over 2 weeks, as Muharrem İnce and his supporters have been in the process of signature collection to change the party management. Meanwhile, it was also announced this week that CHP chairman Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu will reshuffle his team of senior aides in a bid to appease the concerns of dissidents in his party. The party's Central Executive Board, the MYK, is made up of a board of members who are determined by our chair. For this reason, our chair always has the authority to change the MYK and continue with a new MYK, CHP spokesperson Bülent Tezcan said on Wednesday after the board's meeting at the party headquarters. Tezcan said, "The party's bylaw grants the leader the authority to choose his top aides within the executive body. In the meantime, the dissidents are staging sit-in protests at the CHP headquarters. A big chair was placed in front of the building on which dissident CHP members are sitting one by one in a symbolic move to show their demand to change the leader. Meanwhile, the Good Party is set to gather for an emergency convention this Sunday. Chairwoman Meral Akşener is expected to be nominated as the sole candidate by the delegates and to be re-elected to lead the party. The commission has set the main slogan of the Congress to "We are just getting started." At the convention, the emphasis will reportedly be put on intra-party democracy to avoid further dissent. Recently, the Good Party has also been going through intra-party unease, and the party was dealt a heavy blow earlier this week following the resignation of 3 of its founding members, namely Yusuf Halaçoğlu, Özcan Yeniçeri, and Nevzat Boz. The three shared a statement with the press regarding their resignations, holding the party administration accountable for the unsuccessful results of the June 24th elections and accusing them of disloyalty during the preparation of the deputy lists. The party administration opted for figures who joined the party later, while founding members were pushed aside, Halaçoğlu said in a news conference.
Floods caused by heavy rains hit the northern province of Ordu on Wednesday, leaving 66 houses and over 200 shops damaged.
Torrential rains on August 8th caused massive flooding and landslides in the northern and southern regions of Turkey, particularly hitting the Black Sea region, where at least 4 bridges collapsed and hundreds of people were rescued after being stuck in their homes or cars. One person has died in a landslide triggered by heavy rains in the northern province of Ordu, officials said on Thursday. A bridge on the highway between Ordu and the neighboring province of Samsun was among the 4 that collapsed due to floods. In Ordu's Perşembe district, 4 cars crashed in a tunnel amid the flooding, leading to a fire. The transportation infrastructure has completely collapsed, and over 300 buildings have been damaged in the region. The floods, which affected more than 500,000 people, also destroyed 30 tons of walnuts. The scale of damage and effect calls the infrastructure and the preparations of the local authorities into question. Turkey's main opposition, Republican People's Party (CHP), and government critics blame the government's turning a blind eye on the reckless environmental policies and approval of controversial hydroelectric power plant projects, which cause significant deforestation in the Black Sea region.
A report on the Financial Times this week highlighted Turkey as an attractive destination for British holidaymakers due to the recent performance of the Turkish lira.
According to the Financial Times, British tourists are facing more expensive holidays overseas due to the depreciating value of the British pound against euro. It was reported that the only location the British tourists are benefiting due to the value of the pound this summer is Turkey. Over the last several months, the growing tension due to the prospect of UK leaving the European Union with no trade deal has affected the value of the British pound. After a course of depreciation, the pound this week fell below 1.12 euros and hit its weakest point against the dollar in more than 11 months. The unfavorable currency conversions sting travelers. British customers are typically given the option to pay in their home currency, but are charged high fees for doing so. ATM companies that convert the currency typically use their own exchange rate. However, there is at least one location that makes the British tourists financially more confident. The Turkish lira, which has been facing a major depreciation against almost all currencies, has made Turkey a hotspot for tourists. Since the beginning of the year, the depreciation of the Turkish lira against the British pound has exceeded 50%, reaching its historical low levels. On Friday, the Turkish lira depreciated by 13% against the pound. With its depreciating currency, Turkey has become a financially beneficial location for Western tourists.
And now we'll take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Tomorrow night, Suma Beach will host 2 precious members of New York's Babel, a community made out of different tribes and cultures willing to gather and unite around music and arts. Damien Lazarus, a legendary dance floor wizard, is the guest of honor at the Magic Forest of Suma Beach. Alongside him will be the founder of Babel Community, Waz and Carlita, a Turkish producer and DJ who focuses on combining sounds from the Middle Eastern and Latin American cultures. In its collection exhibition, In Pursuit of the Present, Istanbul Modern focuses on human conditions in today's world. The exhibition features works that explore the relationship between humans and cities, nature, and between their own selves and their physical environment in historical, social, and personal contexts. Moreover, the exhibition holds a mirror to how human emotions are influenced by the new visual and oral stimuli that have emerged in the world today.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.